All right, the recording has started. Welcome everyone to another Fan Ambassadors Fan Meetups. I'm one of your hosts, Jeremy Johnston,
I'm your other host, Angelo Corsino.
and as per usual, we're here to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. So we actually got Toronto Comic Con coming up in just a little bit more than a month. It's Friday the 14th to Sunday the 16th.
Definitely going to be excited to be putting on some games back at Comic Con. It's been a while since we've been at that con running games.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, last year we just did a panel, but it was 2019 last time we actually ran games there. So yeah, it's exciting to have tabletop back there, and we'll be running more than just Dungeons and Dragons. For more information, check out unitethefactions.com, join our Discord channel, and come in person to sign up to play.
So,
All right.
without further ado, why everyone is here tonight, we're going to be talking about Dungeon Mastering 101 and just some basics on how to get into running games of D&D.
Yeah. So we'll dive right in, and the easiest thing for someone that's interested in getting into DMing or being a dungeon master first, of course, is to understand what being a dungeon master is. So, being a dungeon master, you are running the game of Dungeons and Dragons. Hopefully, you know what Dungeons and Dragons is already, but we'll give you a brief intro here. Dungeons and Dragons is a shared storytelling game. Uh, People, have characters that they play and that they, design using some rules, and there's one player in the game that is designated as the dungeon master. So you're all playing this game together.
And that is a very important distinction. The Dungeon Master in Dungeons and Dragons is also a player. Yes, they're the ones who are facilitating the game, but it's also important that the Dungeon Master has fun so that they can continue to put on a fun experience for everybody else.
Yeah, because it is a game and everyone's playing a game together. Um, so to really get started, though, you are playing Dungeons and Dragons, and like any other game, you need to know what the rules are to play the game. And there's a little bit more, or I should say, a lot more responsibility for the dungeon master to know what's up. So where do you find the rules?
So there are a number of different mediums that you can get the rules of the game in. So there are the books, there is D&D Beyond, and then there are various starter sets that have everything that you would need to run the game in its own little neat little box.
So what books do you think you need there, Angelo?
The books that you would need would be probably the Player's Handbook, and then also the Dungeon Master's Guide, and then in order to put stuff in your game, the Monster Manual.
All right, cool. Yeah, and of course those are available, in book form or digitally, as Angelo mentioned, on dndbeyond.com. But there is another way that you could get started. Maybe a little bit rules light, and that's with one of the starter sets. And I actually see some boxes there on your shelf.
I was ready to get it out, and then I forgot to clear the area.
It's all good. So, and they'll actually be coming out with a new starter set this fall for the 2025 refresh. But that's the original one from 2014.
Yep, still in shrink. It's a very it's one of those things that it's like got a little bit of like a personal touch to me because it was the very first thing I played in Dungeons and Dragons was the starter set.
Yeah, starter sets are really good. They usually come with some pre-generated or pre-created character sheets so that you don't have to spend a lot of time, which, people love creating characters, but if you want to get started quick, pre-generated are awesome. Uh, a starter set also usually comes with a set of dice because, of course, D&D is played with many different sided dice. And it'll come with generally, two really small books. One is a small rule book, and the other is the adventure itself. And so you basically have everything you need to play. So, if you don't want to, necessarily invest in buying all the books, a starter set is a great way to get started. And if you are looking to buy, the physical product, of course, we would recommend going to your friendly local gaming store.
Yeah, your friendly local gaming store is very likely going to have everything that you need to run a game of Dungeons and Dragons, and they're going to be much happier to have you and even possibly give you a space to play.
Yeah. We'll go over places to play a little bit later in the discussion, but yeah, anything you can do to support your friendly local gaming store is definitely the way to go. So we're going to go through the basics here and talk through some of the terminology and some of the things you might want to think about while you're getting ready to run your first game. And one of those concepts is something called theater of the mind.
It's by far the cheapest and easiest way to get into Dungeons and Dragons, as it all that it requires for you to play, other than just the dice and character sheets, is your imagination. You don't need expensive minis. You don't need to spend a lot of time on maps. It's all just a matter of being able to describe to your players what's happening and what's going on without any visual aids for the most part.
Yeah, and I guess the next step up, or different form of play, as Angelo mentioned, would be to use maps and minis. And maps can be pretty simple. You can draw your own on any kind of paper. You could get creative and grab scrap materials and create your own little maps. And I've even seen people use different candies to represent different players or monsters.
That's always a fun one because when the players and their characters defeat the monsters, then they get the candy. Is usually how those kind of systems work, and it's kind of like in a mini game. People are making choices to which candy they want instead of trying to make perfect tactical decisions.
For sure. And if you are using the standard grid for maps, which has squares on it, which represent a 5 by 5 foot square in the game's rules, then using something like a Starburst or a Jolly Rancher actually almost fits perfectly in there.
Yeah, and then these various size creatures will all have different base sizes to kind of go with the map. Like this huge size creature, which is a Tyrannosaurus Rex, would have a 3 by 3 grid or nine, or basically a box on the map.
Yeah. So what we're getting at though is that if you're the dungeon master, you're basically running the game, and to do so, you do need to prepare. So unlike board games where you just throw the box on the table, open it up, read the rules, and go for it, you know Dungeons and Dragons requires more preparation time. So probably a few days or a week in advance of when you might think you'd like to play, at the minimum, you would want to start reading through an adventure if you want to run an adventure that is pre-written, or read through the rules, to familiarize yourself with how you'd like to run the game.
Now, prep time is going to vary, especially as you grow in experience. Sometimes you don't prep at all. Sometimes you just kind of wing it, so to speak. But when you're starting out, we definitely suggest a little bit of prep, more for yourself than anything else, because for your players, they're gonna react to you. So if you feel comfortable and are just putting it out there, your players are going to be able to build on that.
For sure. Um, but again, familiarize yourself with the rules, how skill checks are made, how saving throws are made, how attacks and combat rules work, because these things will come up, and they are a lot of the core mechanics of how games play out.
And
But
definitely always trust your gut. Like, if you have a whole bunch of stuff written down and something happens that, kind of deviates from that a little bit, don't be afraid to educate and use your DM power to continue the story and build off of that.
for sure, yeah, like Angelo said, things can go off the rails pretty quick when playing Dungeons and Dragons, because like I said, it is a game of shared storytelling. So when players are given the option to do something, they might do something you don't anticipate. So as much as we say you should plan your games, don't plan too much, um, because you still want players to have some agency in playing the game. You don't want to railroad them too much.
Yeah, the game of D&D is not like a modus operandi. It is not a work that you are basically pouring out there to be your masterpiece. It's the masterpiece. Everyone is involved in telling said story.
And in part of setting it up, and even before you play the game, we suggest running something called a session zero. So even if you're only running like a game that's going to, start and end in one sitting, it's probably a good idea to go over some ground rules, which is what a session zero looks to accomplish. So the sorts of things that people want to get out of the game, and of course, some of the things they don't want to see in a game. So a lot of people, don't like violence against children. They don't want to see harassment of any sort in a game.
Torture is another one that usually gets cut out as something that people don't want to actively participate in or
For
see.
sure. Yeah, or racism. Like these are just,
Basic
being
things.
good people. Yeah. And there's some safety tools that can be introduced and used as well. We certainly recommend them when playing in a public setting, but they are also important when playing with people uh, that you might not be that familiar with, or again, just to set some ground rules. The easiest one is the X card. It's a simple X that you can put on a piece of paper or something the size of a business card that everyone can have. And if they throw it on the table or touch, the big X on the table, you can pause the game and have a discussion about whatever might be taking away from someone's fun at the table. And as dungeon master, it's your job to adjudicate, that situation, and just to, make sure that everyone's having fun and everyone feels safe at the table.
Yeah, like it can be anything too. It doesn't even have to be like huge major issues because everyone's a little different. We don't know what makes everyone else tick. So the example that I always like to use is one of my games. We had a player who there was a bunch of attack dogs that were fighting the party, and the group like basically said absolutely not. Definitely not going to be doing any like killing of any dogs or anything like that. So we changed them to giant spiders. Like, so it's just a matter of whatever is going to make somebody uncomfortable, you just take that and make the changes that you need to keep the game moving and keep everybody having fun.
Totally. Um, and so that takes us to, another one of the basics we wanted to cover, the difference between a one shot and a campaign. So a one shot is, as I kind of described a little bit before, is the intention of running a game that ideally, can start and finish within one, play session. So, planning your game for, I don't know, 2 to 4 hours, maybe even 6 if it's your first game, might be a good idea. If you mean for it to be a one shot. And it might really be worthwhile to use something like the starter set and just run like one chapter or something like that, versus something like a campaign.
So campaigns can come in many varieties. There are mini campaigns, which are campaigns that are generally completed in somewhere between 4 and 6 sessions. And then there are like full scale campaigns that often take months in order to get through the story.
Or even years.
Sometimes even years. They generally start you at a low level and finish the game at a much higher level than which you started, and will allow you to build with your players through the course of however long it takes you to play said campaign. And those ones are generally a lot more fleshed out. They generally consider a wider world as opposed to just a small section of a town that you might be in for a one shot.
Yeah. So we did just get a question here that was asking about if we've seen any of the 2024 manuals. And I can say that they're right behind me.
Yeah, I
Uh,
have all three of them as well.
and I have read them. Not cover to cover. To me, they're more like resource books, like a dictionary. I tend to, read up on the things that, are pertinent to what I'm running. whether it's a particular type of monster, um, or a particular class that I might be playing, or that one of the players might be playing, so that I can better understand what it is.
And
And oh, go ahead.
as for the three books themselves, I find them to be fantastic. They definitely, I don't want to say they've completely fixed, but they've definitely addressed a lot of the issues that people had with certain classes, with certain monsters, and did put in a lot more um, clearer language when it comes to how things function.
Yeah. So another question was, are they more detailed? And yes, they are definitely more detailed. And these core books for 2024, although still fifth edition, are much longer. And certainly, a very natural evolution from the books that we had from about a decade ago.
Yeah, like the changes weren't so big that it's an entire new system, but they did tweak enough things that it does feel like a lot of changes were made.
Yeah, so some people are calling it 5.5 or 5.24 or similar. Because who knows, we might get another, iteration of the fifth edition rules. We'll have to wait and see. But bringing it back to DMing, um, one of the things that you might also discuss with your session zero or when planning out your one shots and such is how you might deal with player death.
Character death.
Sorry, character death.
Player death
Um,
is much more serious.
yeah, my apologies. Um, yeah, so death is part of the game. Quite often, there will be battles where creatures might die, but characters might die as well. And so, understanding how those will be addressed is important too. Now, sometimes it can be super fun, perhaps with the way they perish. If somebody does something stupid or funny.
Go out in a
That
blaze of glory sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And one joke that people were hoping for in the latest D&D movie from about a couple of years ago was that one of the characters would die and then the actor would come back as a different character. Like that would have been like amazing. But we'll have to wait and see if we ever get something like that. But in terms of other resources to get you started with dungeon mastering, another great resource that's out there, other than Google, Reddit, or an AI, would be watching live plays like on Twitch or YouTube.
Yeah, and there's a lot of good ones out there. There's like Dimension 20, everybody loves Critical Role. There's tons of like small group live plays that are out there as well that are just a bunch of friends rolling dice and having some fun. And the important thing to when you're looking at live plays and such as kind of like inspiration is that it's just that it's inspiration. Um, it is a disservice to yourself to try to live up to one of those like great dungeon masters that spends a ton of time and has a ton of experience and knows their group almost better than they know themselves to the point where they can put on these grand spectacles. Now, it's nothing wrong with wanting to try to build towards that, but don't get upset if, you feel like you're not a Brennan Lee Mulligan, right? Like there's only one of those and
Yeah, find what works for you. Play to your own strengths. If you're not someone who does voices, that's okay. If you have more of a music background, maybe there'll be a little bit more interesting things for bards or for visits to taverns and such. If you like puzzles or math or just really any of the sciences or social sciences, you might incorporate those things into the game because you are only limited by your imagination.
yeah, because like effectively at the end of the day, the point that we keep driving home is that this is a collaborative storytelling experience. So
Yeah,
even though you're the one as the dungeon master running the game, it's important to understand that the game itself kind of will revolve around all of you together.
For sure. And I would, give people the advice of get yourself a notebook, whether that's digital or not, it's up to you. But, take notes, that way you can summarize sessions, remember key things that have happened, jot down ideas. Maybe you think of some threads for other stories that you would like to pursue. Um, but again, if taking notes and such is not one of your strengths, you can
You can
certainly have
employ
one of the
what I like to
players.
do, which is to designate a player at your table, and they're your note taker. They will take the
Yeah,
notes for the entire group, and at the beginning of the session, that when you guys come back, you can have them kind of explain to the group, like, what you guys did last time, and that just kind of is a good way to get everybody back on track,
for
like
sure.
with their peers, so to speak, being the ones kind of doing the recap.
And in those cases, if someone else is taking the notes and they're not going to be the one running the game, it might be a good idea for that to be done digitally, just in case that player is not available the next time you play. Or if for some reason they leave the game and someone else wants to take on that duty, if you have, a campaign running. Obviously, you know, you might not take notes to that same degree if it's just a one shot, but it's certainly an opportunity to write down, things that you would like to maybe even improve on or read more about ahead of the next time you play, whether it's rules or lore or monster stat blocks and such. And that gets us through the basics. Again, for those that are here with us live, if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. We've already addressed a couple. But now we're going to get to, like, what kind of game are you running, right? So that brings us to talking about another game term, which is homebrew versus hardcover.
Now, as we were saying before, when you're running a game and running a campaign, the question is are you going to create everything yourself, in the world, the characters, the story, the narrative, and that would be what is considered a homebrew campaign? Or are you going to pick up one of the pre-published adventures that are already out there and use that as the basis for your campaign, and that would be considered running a hardcover adventure?
Right. And you can blend the two things. Like if you are creating your own homebrew world or if you are starting out in a hardcover, you can kind of flip flop in between them if it's something that you're interested in. Maybe you like an anthology book, something like Tales from the Yawning Portal, and use one of the mini adventures as something you might want to throw in between something that your homebrew world. Yeah, like a side quest. Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Something like White Plume Mountain, because maybe you want to give them some sick loot.
Like some very dangerous contraband in the form of incredibly powerful artifacts.
With attitude, yeah.
Um, the
um,
other the other thing that you can kind of do is there's as we were saying, like there's a lot of different like places to get these modules. Um, I'll get to that question in a second, Adam. Side quest suggestions for Lost Mine. That's interesting. Um, is the first party like kind of sources, which are all the published stuff from WotC. That's your Descent into Avernus. That's your Curse of Strahd. That's your
Storm
all your
King's Thunder.
big ones. Your Storm King's Thunder. And then you've kind of got other third party options, which consists of things like Quickstone, the new Eberron supplement by Keith Baker. That wasn't done by WotC, but it's still considered a D&D supplement. It's considered, so that makes it like a third party kind of thing. And where would you get those kind of like third party modules and such?
Well, probably the easiest place to find these would be dmsguild.com. It's where a lot of older content has been published for older editions, but there's also a ton of content for current editions, both from Wizards of the Coast or WotC, as you mentioned, or some that has been written by the community. They have an open gaming license and their own set of rules specifically for the DM's Guild, where people can publish adventures in existing, lore-based settings that are official settings from Wizards of the Coast and Dungeons and Dragons. But of course, you could just Google. There's a lot of third parties or smaller outfits of people and websites where you can find adventures to run. And then, of course, there's Adventurers League, which is available on DM's Guild. And it's kind of like an organized play campaign of old. They haven't come out with some new campaigns in recent years, but there's over 10, seasons of campaigns available there that were usually married up, if you will, to the hardcover of that year, or the big hardcover adventure of that year, which would be a great place to find some side quests for almost any campaign,
Yeah,
as
so
they're all one shots.
to answer the question of do we have any suggestions for side quests for Lost Mines of Phandelver, there you can basically go to DM's Guild and look for any tier 1 Adventure League module that would be set in the city and adapt that very easily to your Lost Mines of Phandelver campaign.
Yeah.
There are side quests that have you searching for stuff like searching for party favors. There are ones that are searching for um, kind of you. There's this one that where you get caught in a time loop. There's all sorts of different adventures that would very easily blend in with Lost Mines that you could find on something like the M's Guild.
Yeah. And again, once you really get going, you might choose to publish an adventure. So you could publish your adventure on DM's Guild as well. And we have an older video that we created on that subject as well. So you can check out our YouTube channel for that. So beyond homebrew versus hardcover, where you're going to play is pretty important as well. So are you going to be playing with friends? Are you looking for a group? These are all things that you kind of need to figure out if you want to dungeon master a game. So in the cases where if you haven't found players, a great place to find players would be your friendly local gaming store, if they would be open to allowing you to run a game there. Or if they have a online social community on something like Discord or Facebook or even meetup.com, where you might find some players. But from there, the great difficulty or the greatest evil in D&D is scheduling.
It is by far the hardest bad guy to overcome in all of Dungeons and Dragons, is getting somewhere between 4 and 7 adults all in the same room at the same time.
Especially if you want, an ongoing game or campaign, that's when it becomes, certainly difficult. So alongside that, being a dungeon master is, having to work through times when some players are missing and what happens to their characters. And again, that might be a subject of something that you discussed during a session 0. Like, is that character just not present? Is that character being played by another player or the dungeon master? Or have they gone on a side quest?
Are they taking care of some personal matters that could only be done for a short period of time while they were in a separate city?
Yeah, and in running a campaign, that might also bring up the question of something really basic is, how do you want to deal with leveling up characters? Do you want to use the method of counting experience points based on actions that they take or monsters that they kill? Or do you want to use milestone experience where after, some quest is fulfilled, everybody gets a level? And then, the other question is for those players and, their characters that weren't present for parts of that, do they get to level up too? Again, these are things you need to consider in your session zero. I mean, it's kind of a punitive measure, but it just depends on your players. If they're not around a lot, maybe that would be a way to incentivize them to show up more.
And obviously, real life takes precedent over a game.
Of
That goes
course.
without saying. But everybody wants to be able to find a time to get together and roll dice because it's a very fun thing that we all do together as gamers.
Yeah. And it could so happen that, in running your games, you might have to skip a session, right? So maybe your players and you come up with a rule that if more than, like 20% of the players, or if two players are missing from a session, that maybe you skip it. And those might be opportunities to do other things, like do a mini side quest, play a one shot that's completely unrelated to your campaign, maybe give someone else a chance at DMing.
Run a one shot that has nothing to do with your campaign, but then work it into your campaign.
Yeah, that could happen too. That sounds awesome. So beyond scheduling and, getting all your players on the same page and such, finding a place to play is also pretty important. You can see behind me we got a table. So if you're playing in person, ideally you have a table to play around, one where everyone can sit down, and where ideally they would have some space to either put down a laptop or some character sheets and a book, maybe some dice and such. But of course, if you'd rather get out of the house, there are some ideas of other places where you could play too.
Yeah, so as we mentioned before, a lot of your friendly local game stores will have Dungeons and Dragons nights or RPG nights, and if they don't and they have play spaces, they would love if you were to come in with your group and run Dungeons and Dragons in their store for the most part if they have play spaces. And then you can work with them to kind of figure out what night works best and such, because it's important to kind of have these little communities where you can kind of all get together and play.
Yeah. Other places might even be your local library, um, Legion Hall, or similar club that of a social nature that you might be able to get some space in to play, or even a restaurant. I know we've played at Stormcrow Manor in Toronto, for example.
School clubs are another great kind of place for people to play if that's something that you're able to do. Like if you're in either even from whether you're in elementary school or you're in high school or post secondary, there's if there's a place or a club that is running Dungeons and Dragons, definitely put yourself in there and kind of see if that is a thing that you would like to continue to do.
Yeah. And you don't have to play in person. You can also play online. So there are online communities out there for which we run, kind of a local / international community of sorts. It was certainly busier during the pandemic, but unitethefactions.com, you can find our website and a link to our Discord. And from time to time, we have some online events in between some of our in-person events as well.
And yeah, and if you look around the internet, there are many different either Discord servers or websites that will allow you to join and or start up running D&D games, just start playing games and such that offer spaces where people can get together and play D&D online using a virtual tabletop or even just a call like the one we're in right now.
Yeah, start playing games, the website is definitely where, if you want to become a professional dungeon master, you can certainly do so and uh, make money doing so. Again, either for one shots or for campaigns. But of course, as we mentioned in the intro, we also run our games at conventions like Toronto Comic Con, Fan Expo, and others. So I would certainly recommend that you have some dungeon mastering experience um, elsewhere before trying to do it in public. But if if you feel you're up to it, I wouldn't discourage it either.
There is a non-zero chance that a gaming community that is running at a convention will turn down a DM, but it's incredibly rare that a gaming community will turn down extra volunteers and people who want to help them put on games in these public convention spaces. Much like our group, where any volunteer that comes to us, we will find you a space to run.
Yeah. And while, everyone has their own learning style, I really do have to say that the best way to learn to be a dungeon master is to just do it,
Yeah,
and keep doing it.
because once you've played a little bit, and I don't want to say it doesn't matter like what kind of player you are, but honestly, if you like to play Dungeons and Dragons and you want to learn to DM, you can. There is absolutely nothing that is going to stop you. I have seen uh people who have gone from not remembering to rage on their first turn as a barbarian to now writing stories and running their own campaigns and like putting on these like grand adventures for other people to play in, like based on just based on experience and the drive to do so. Like it's just a matter of practice and continuing to enjoy the aspects of Dungeons and Dragons that we all love.
Yeah. And as I was mentioning earlier, I'll just say it again, take notes. You know, what notes you take is what's going to be important to you. Like I said, it's either, taking notes of what happened in the session, but it can also be things that you want to, explore more. Um, but if you are planning on running things online, there are some things that you should probably know about if you don't know about them already. Uh, as we mentioned, there are online tools like those available from dndbeyond.com, which is where you can find the official rules available to you online. But there's also something called virtual tabletops.
And the aforementioned D&D Beyond does have their own virtual tabletop. It's still, I believe, in beta testing, but it is functional. It does work. Um, but there are other ones that are quite established. There's Roll20, which is what a lot of people use. It's probably the most like a widespreadly used virtual tabletop. There's also Foundry, which is another virtual tabletop, much like Roll20, has integration with D&D Beyond. Will allow you to import your character sheets to Foundries from D&D Beyond, so that you can have it all on that virtual tabletop, as well as some other ones that are a little bit more complicated but have very interesting features, such as like fantasy grounds and there are any others that I'm forgetting.
Well, there's smaller ones like Owl Bear Rodeo.
Owl Bear Rodeo is another fantastic one. Owl Bear Rodeo is very good for if you are doing it very simply, because I don't believe there's even like a dice roller on Owl Bear Rodeo, but it's a map. You can move stuff around. You can have HP bars. You can have all that sort of thing all on it and run it from even your cell phone. It's actually much unlike Roll20. Owl Bear Rodeo you can run from your cell phone.
Yeah. But you don't have to use a virtual tabletop if you want to play online. Again, going back to something we were talking about in the beginning in theater of the mind, you could just be having a video call, not unlike what we're doing right here, right now.
Yeah, and then you kind of it becomes a game much more of more like flavorful descriptions and like clear kind of language to illustrate what's happening. but it is a completely and perfectly valid way to play Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. One that I haven't really played myself, but there are some people that play this way online as well, is play by post.
Play by post is actually a format that I quite enjoy. It is it's effectively everything is typed. You narrate everything your character does by typing it all out. Usually, these sorts of games take much longer to play if everyone is running play by post, but it is oftentimes a way to kind of in your spare time play where you get like you take a turn in combat over the course of like an hour, and then like somebody else will take their turn in an hour, and so on and so forth, and you keep coming back to it, and it's just and over the course of time you get like the full narration of what happened in an encounter.
Yeah. So bringing it back to dungeon mastering, the rules and 101, you're definitely going to want to, if you're going to play something bigger than the starter set, dive into those books, um, and start looking for the tools that you want to use to build out your campaign beyond just the basic rules of how to deal with characters and skill checks, saving throws, attack rolls, all that sort of stuff. The new 2024 books make this even easier than before. I would really recommend taking a look at the glossaries that they have at the back of the player's handbook. It's a real quick way to get to a lot of rules that have often been misunderstood. Stuff like grappling, which is used in combat when grabbing somebody, or even stuff like what happens when people want to sneak around, or what we call stealth, right?
All right, so again, because this is a showcase on dungeon mastering, let's talk a little bit about how to handle players at your table. There are different types of players that you're going to have. You're going to have the players that want to have those like big thespian moments where they go through like long narrations of role playing, and those are fantastically fun, but they can be time consuming and such, depending on what you're trying to accomplish in game. There are the people who just want to fight everything, fight everything. I want to fight that. Let's go fight that. I just want to fight that. And again, that's a completely valid style to play if that's what your group wants. And the biggest trick of as a dungeon master is figuring out how to mesh all these personalities. And the best way to do that is to as we've said before, is have conversations with your players. At but that's a good and fun, very valid thing and easy way to say, but when you're at the table, in order to mesh those personalities, it requires usually some sort of quick thinking and educating on the fly. So, what do you think, Jeremy, are some good ways to like kind of just balance the different personalities that could be around the table?
Well, I think it's really important to give everybody a chance to play their character the way that they want to. After having, of course, had your session zero and all that kind of stuff, and encourage people to roll with failures. Okay, so if people get into situations where things don't go the way that they wanted to, perhaps they have rolled really low on something that they wanted to do, play it out, play it through. There's good consequences and bad consequences to a lot of situations, uh, and you know what might sometimes happen when dealing with certain personalities, people might try to tell people how they should handle said situations. And that's where, you have to make sure that you listen to what is being said, but then encourage the player, who's experiencing what has happened, to be the one to determine how they deal with it and what they would like to do next.
Yeah, as a dungeon master, one of the biggest things that you can do to keep your table having fun is to discourage quarterbacking. And there's experienced players that love to kind of be like they're like really excited they know the rules really well, and they want to kind of like help everybody out, and that overzealousness can sometimes overpower some of the other personalities at the table and kind of like diminish their contributions by basically being told what to do. And one of the big things as a dungeon master is to figure out how to not kind of like discourage that person from being excited, but to maybe kind of discourage them from advocating for other players.
For sure. And another thing that might come up is, especially as people are learning the rules, yourself included, some things might come up where one of the player personalities is the rules lawyer. So someone who is like, hey, this is not against this is against the rules, or you can't do that, that sort of thing. And so how you adjudicate that is equally important. So sometimes, something that is suggested by someone, can bend the rules and could even be considered a situation where you would like to use the rule of cool. It's just someone has suggested something so awesome, you just got to let it play out. But at the same time, on that more rules lawyer end of things, you might need to rein things in, or go back a turn. Okay, you can't actually do that, but what would you like to do instead?
Yeah, there's a that fine balance between, like, especially with the rules lawyer. I can be that player. I often times will only do that if I'll only usually do that if someone else is trying to push the DM into something that the DM very clearly doesn't want to have happen. But and that's kind of,
Or
if
might
I'm
not
the,
realize.
or might not realize exactly. And again, there's nothing like inherently wrong with that. Like if the DM says, "Yeah, sure, that's fine," just go with it. But and as the DM, that is kind of what your role is. You're kind of figure out, well, if this person does know the rules really well, but that sounds like a little too good. Don't be afraid to be like, you know what? I believe you, but we're gonna do it this way. As the person running the game, that is fully within your rights to do.
For sure. Yeah. And I mean, that brings us to just, some of the things you may or may not choose to do as a dungeon master. Some of the things that you might bring to the table might be something called a dungeon master screen or DM screen. And it's basically just like a paper board or cardboard that usually has some really nice art on it for the players to see. And on the inside, it has, like a cheat sheet of a whole bunch of different rules that, often come up. Some dungeon masters choose to roll their dice behind this screen, so that they can potentially use a more storytelling, way of dealing with how the dice land. So if the dungeon master rolls something that rolls low, they describe that it just didn't go the way that it was desired for what they were rolling for. But at the same time, we had a great comment here in the chat where someone said, maybe you roll so well that you're just going to obliterate someone and you soften the blow.
And Ivy had an excellent question. What happens if two players start arguing over the rules? That one honestly is very simple as the DM. Don't obviously put yourself in harm's way if this is a table that of people that you don't know, but um, you're the one running the game. You can effectively ask them to stop. Don't be afraid to kind of use your voice and say, "Hey, settle down. We'll resolve this." There's definitely no situation where two players should be fighting at the table over a ruling. That is 100% up to the DM, and as the DM, uh, that is something that has to be kind of conveyed in any manner of your choosing.
Yeah, and it is important to remind people that it is just a game.
Yes.
Okay, but you're right. You could, as a dungeon master, and yes, this belongs in a DM 101 conversation. You could run into a problem in your player group, okay, players, not characters, players, where,
Players.
where one of the players, that has come to play D&D with you is toxic, okay?
It does happen, and it's and sometimes these are your friends, these are people you've known for a very long time, and it makes it very difficult to kind of figure out how to handle that sort of like a delicate situation. And the best thing to do is to is to kind of like approach them and just say, "Hey," and you don't have to do it in public, put them on blast at the table. You can do it, after the session, or even just in a text message or like a Discord message or something of that variety, and just say, "Hey, I've been noticing that this is going on. Is everything okay? Like, is there something that's been bothering you? Like, what is the source of this kind of behavior of sorts?" And that'll depend on what's happening.
Yeah, because
And
as groups continue to play with each other, relationships form between the characters, relationships get stronger between the players, and, a vibe of sorts develops between the entire group. And sometimes, unfortunately, some players, might not fit with the type of game that people are playing, and that's okay. I can tell you from personal experience that I play with a group of friends, and we have, great fun playing Dungeons and Dragons together. And we've tried other systems, and sometimes people don't want to play those systems just because, uh, it doesn't really, interest them that much in terms of the storytelling. But, like I said, it could be worse, and it could be a toxic player, or just a player that just, isn't getting along with the rest of the players. And it's okay to, get to a point where you have to ask that person to consider playing with other people, that like to play the way that they would like to play.
yeah, and it's never a fun conversation to have, but as we kind of have mentioned a few times, the most important thing is that everybody at the table is having fun, including yourself as the dungeon master. And if there's are players at the table that are kind of impacting that and are putting that everybody else in a position where things are less fun or things aren't working anymore, then tough conversations, unfortunately, will have to be had in order to, I don't want to say
Yeah,
preserve the sanctity of the table, but to kind of just keep the table together and keep everybody
for
having
sure.
fun.
Yeah. And who knows, maybe you really like this person, this player, and you want to start a new group with them. Some dungeon masters have multiple groups that they run. Uh, and sometimes they're a dungeon master and sometimes they're a game master because they're playing a different system. But, that's something that you can pursue if you like. That's probably more for, a campaign between, people that develop, a closer relationship, maybe they're friends or family. But in a public setting, there are some other things to consider as well. Especially if you're starting a new group, consider the age level and, how the adventure you might be running, is it appropriate or not. Also, one thing that we have found in public settings, if there is going to be a minor at the table, it's probably a good idea if their parent is there as well, either as another player, which would be awesome, but at least there as a chaperone.
Yeah, because the last thing that anybody wants is to be put in a situation where things are very uncomfortable, and because the subject matter of the game just doesn't quite fit the group.
Mhm.
And when you're DMing in public, you don't always have the luxury of a session zero with the group that you're going to be playing with.
Exactly. But which is why it's important to start sessions, or if you have a player join kind of, late to the game, just be sure to have the conversation about safety tools, so that everyone, gets it the right mindset, that, they are playing with other people and they have to consider other people's, you know, feelings as to how they would like to play.
And you don't have to feel like you have to resolve every scenario in that regard as the dungeon master. If you are DMing in a public setting, like for example at Comic Con or Fan Expo with Unite the Factions, if something does happen at your table, you can go up to the admin desk and ask for help, and then even us, if we can't solve it at the admin desk, we can go to event security and take it a step
Yeah,
further if we have to. There are
lucky
always
it's never
options.
happened.
Yeah, like knocking on wood,
Yeah.
like. But
All right.
if these things, like I said, they don't ever feel trapped as a dungeon master. There are options that you have to get out of these situations that are uncomfortable in like a social setting.
Yeah. All right. So again, bringing it back, start with a starter set or the core books. You don't have to, go through and Google a ton of stuff. Just set aside some time, prep what you would like to run, hopefully get a group of people together and start playing, have a blast. I can say that, Dungeons and Dragons is a great game for building lifelong friendships. All right. So it's definitely worth your time to pursue and to enjoy as a creative outlet.
Before we kind of cut the stream, are there any final questions anyone has? We have a few minutes left.
Okay. Ivy says yes, they do have a question. It sounds like, and we did have another comment here that is certainly something that would be worth mentioning during a session zero. And sometimes you have to remind people that ultimately the dungeon master is a mediator of sorts, uh, not just between conflicts, but between what the rules are. Although there are written rules in books and online resources, sometimes the dungeon master might choose to not use the rule that way. But it is important to communicate that so that people understand. But at the same time, the rules are tricky and open to some interpretation. And ultimately, it's the
Oftentimes,
dungeon master.
exclusively interpretation of the DM.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
so there are a bunch of different places that you can go for clarification on rules. The kind of easiest one are like web forums, kind of like um, there are Discord servers that have rules discussions. There's the Sage Advice Compendium, which is not necessarily considered law of the game anymore, but it is done by the Sage, which is Jeremy Crawford. He's the
Yeah.
guy who wrote the rules, and he kind of put in a bunch of clarifications to the most asked questions.
We
Those are
haven't
all
seen that for the 2024 rules yet,
hasn't
though.
2024 is still new,
Yeah, it's
but
still
we
pretty
haven't
new.
had
But you can even look on Reddit
yeah.
or join a Discord server not unlike our own and ask questions and see what other people think.
In terms of like quick rules education, this is where what we were saying earlier. Do not be afraid to be like, this is how I'm calling it today. After I will go look it up, but for right now to keep the game moving, this is my ruling.
Yeah. There's a question here asking what is a good resource for connecting players and dungeon masters together?
Um, Definitely like as in resource, your local game store is going to have a bunch of people that are going to possibly be looking for RPG nights.
Yep.
Start playing games online is a huge resource of DMs and players. Um,
Meetup.com
Meetup.com.
is how I met my weekly group.
That's how I met my weekly group as well. Was Meetup.com back in the day when we were playing at a store called Decode.
Yeah.
Warhorn Warhorn is more for like events, as I understand it. But again, if there are events that are happening online, you can absolutely use Warhorn to jump into them. Same with tabletop.events. Those
Yep.
are usually for like conventions and game days and such. But Yours are all different websites that will put you in a position to play if you are looking to play,
Yeah,
or
and
DM.
yeah, or just going to Google and looking to see if there's people close to you that are looking for groups. There are groups or communities that form not unlike our own. There's also Toronto D&D, and just social media in general.
Yeah, there's always people on social media being like, "Hey, I'm a DM. I'm looking for a bunch of players," or "Hey, I've got this Discord server where we run one shots and stuff like that."
Yeah, but it's great to take your questions. We really appreciate them. But we've run out of time. And so for now, we'd like to say I hope that you can join us at one of these sessions in the future. So, keep your eyes on fanexpohq.com. You can join our Discord server, hit us up on unitethefactions.com, or visit us in person at Toronto Comic Con. We'll be in the North Building as the whole con is there, um, in the tabletop gaming area. And you can play a game or just stop by and chat.
Well, we love doing this. We hope to do some shows, not if not like this one, some other interesting content that'll be coming up in the future. And with that, we will sign off for the evening.
All right, take it easy. Bye for now.
Good night.